Your life is mine now.
Lagos is a city that never permits you to hear your own thoughts. It is a beautiful, chaotic monster of concrete neon lights and the endless, aggressive hum of yellow Danfo buses. In this loud world, 26-year-old Adanna had built a perfect sanctuary. She was a modern woman, a graphic designer who dealt only in clean pixels, cold mathematics, and physical reality. To Adanna, the ancient stories of spirits, witches, and blood curses belonged in dusty Nollywood videotapes from the 90s. They were things meant to frighten children, so they wouldn't wander into the bush. But the blood in our veins does not care about our modern logic. It remembers where it came from, even when we try our best to forget. It was a Tuesday evening, just as the sun was dipping below the Atlantic, painting the Lagos lagoon in shades of bruised purple and gold. Adanna sat in her air-conditioned office, her fingers dancing across her keyboard, completely insulated from the supernatural. She was happy, she was safe, and then her phone began to vibrate. The screen did not show a name, only a long, strange string of numbers, originating from a place she had not visited in 15 years, the deep, forgotten country, a place her mother had fled before she died. She picked it up, and the voice on the other end did not say hello. It only breathed a wet, rattling sound, like dry leaves scraping against a tombstone. The rattling sound on the other end slowly coalesced into words. It was her Uncle Jude, a man whose laughter once filled the old compound in Oru, now sounding hollowed out and fragile. Adanna, my child, it is your grandmother, Mama Obi. Adanna's heart stuttered, a physical reaction that betrayed her mental shield. Oru, Mama Obi, names she had packaged neatly away, like old clothes destined for a charity box. She closed her eyes. Suddenly, the warm glow of her Lagos monitors, still displaying her intricate design work, felt cold and artificial. The studio around her seemed to tilt. She swallowed the modern logic that told her this was just anxiety. "Jude, what is it? Speak to me," she demanded, her modern independence demanding control. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the weight of deep, uncultivated time. Jude inhaled. The sound through the receiver was wet and desperate, as if he were fighting back tears or terror. The darkness has found its way inside the house. Adanna, she will not eat. She will not speak to any human being. When she opens her mouth, she only whispers to the corners of her room, in a language that died 50 years ago. She is fading, and she only calls your mother's name and yours. The elders are afraid, Adanna. They say the river is hungry. Adanna stood in the dim light of her sophisticated studio and felt a coldness creep into her marrow. The river, the shadows, the warnings. Jude was speaking the language of superstition, but the raw terror in his voice was undeniable. The argument, it did not start with shouting. It started with a heavy, suffocating silence. Chima stood in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. He watched her. He watched the frantic, trembling movement of her hands as she packed her bags. "You cannot go, Adanna," he said. His voice was low, tight, and strained. "It is just an old woman's mind playing tricks on her. It is dementia. It is old age. It is not a calling." Adanna did not stop. She zipped the bag. The sound of the zipper was loud, sharp, like a tiny scream in the quiet room. "She is my grandmother, Chima," Adanna replied. She did not look at him. She could not. She is the only person left who knows where I came from. If she is whispering to the dark, I need to know why. Chima stepped forward. He took her hands. His hands were warm, safe, the anchor she had relied on for 3 years in Lagos. There are things in those villages, Adanna, things that do not play by the rules of this city, he whispered. His eyes were wide, dark, with a very real fear. My father warned me, the night in those places, it has ears, it has a voice. If you go alone. Adanna pulled her hands away, gently but firmly. I am a designer, Chima. I deal in reality, she said, trying to convince herself, more than him, I am not afraid of shadows. But as she spoke those words, the wind outside their window howled. It was a dry, parched sound. The harmattan was coming early this year, and deep in her chest, a small, cold voice whispered that she was lying. The transition from the concrete towers of Lagos to the ancient forest of Oru was not sudden. It was a slow, agonizing decay. The smooth, paved asphalt slowly crumbled away, turning into a rough, orange-red clay road that seemed to swallow the tires of the old bus. With every kilometer they traveled, the radio stations from the city began to crackle, fade, and die. The modern world was slipping away. Adanna pressed her forehead against the cold, vibrating window pane. Outside, the towering trees of the rainforest stood like silent, watching giants. A thick, heavy fog crawled out from the undergrowth, hugging the red soil. It did not look like normal mist. It looked like breath. The other passengers on the bus did not speak. They sat in a heavy, uncomfortable silence, their eyes fixed on the floorboards or staring straight ahead into nothingness. In the countryside, people know that some roads do not just lead to places, they lead to times that should have been left forgotten. Adanna clutched her handbag tighter against her chest. The coldness she had felt in her Lagos studio had not left her. In fact, as the bus jolted deeper into the silent trees, it was only getting colder. The bus did not enter Oru. It stopped at the dusty junction, hissed a breath of grey smoke, and quickly sped away, leaving Adanna standing alone in the rising dust. Before her lay the village of her mother's childhood, Oru, but it did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress or a tomb. The air was thick, smelling of damp moss, rotting wood, and the unmistakable, metallic tang of the nearby river. Adanna took a step forward, her boots crunching softly on the red gravel. She looked at the houses, and a cold hand seemed to squeeze her chest. Every single window on every single building was boarded up. Heavy, thick planks of wood had been nailed shut, crudely but securely, over the glass. It was as if the people of Oru were desperately trying to keep something out, or, perhaps, to keep themselves from looking. From the shadows of a nearby porch, an old man appeared. His face was deeply lined, like the bark of an ancient tree. He did not wave, he did not smile, he only stared. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and completely hollow. Other doors creaked open. Just a fraction. Silent eyes peered through the dark cracks, watching the girl from the city walk past. Nobody greeted her. No children ran out to play. In Oru, even the daylight felt like a warning, and as the sun finally slipped below the canopy of the forest, the crickets suddenly stopped chirping. The night had officially begun. At the far edge of the village stood the house. It was a massive, crumbling, colonial structure. Once, it had been white. Now, the paint peeled away like dead skin, exposing the dark, rotting wood beneath. It did not look like a home that welcomed family. It looked like a cage. Adanna stood at the bottom of the wooden steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Each beat felt loud in the heavy silence. The air here was different. It was cold. It tasted of river silt and old, damp paper. She walked up the stairs, the wood creaking, screaming beneath her weight. When she reached the front door, she stopped. Bolted across the thick, dark mahogany were 3 massive, rusted iron padlocks. Why would an old, sick woman lock herself in like a prisoner? Or was she locking something else inside? Adanna reached out, her hand trembling. She touched the cold iron of the lock. Suddenly, from the other side of the door, she heard it, a sound. It was soft, wet, and rhythmic. Drip, 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 like water falling onto a cold, concrete floor. But there were no pipes in Oru. There was no plumbing in this old house. Before she could pull her hand back, the heavy brass doorknob slowly began to turn from the inside. The door did not swing open. It creaked, centimeters at a time, as if the wood itself was resisting. Through the narrow gap, a hand reached out. It was a hand made of bone and paper-thin skin. It did not grab Adanna's luggage. It grabbed her wrist. The grip was shockingly cold. It felt like iron dipped in river water. Adanna, the voice was a dry rattle, but it held a desperate, terrifying strength. Adanna was pulled into the heavy darkness of the hallway. The door behind her slammed shut with a force that rattled the floorboards. Inside, the house smelled of old church incense and wet soil. Mama Obi stood before her. Her eyes, clouded over with thick, grey cataracts, did not look at Adanna's face. They seemed to look through her. "You came," the old woman whispered, her chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged gasps. "I told them you would not come, but the river knew you would." "Mama, it is me. You are safe," Adanna said, her voice trembling as she tried to pull her wrist away. But Mama Obi's fingers only tightened. "There is no safety here, child," Mama Obi whispered, leaning close, until Adanna could smell the stale, earthy scent of her breath. "Not anymore. The seals are rotting, and they are waiting." Mama Obi did not let go. She leaned closer until the flickering light of the candle cast long, dancing shadows across her wrinkled face. "Listen to me, Adanna," the old woman whispered. Her voice was no longer a rattle. It was sharp, cold, deadly serious. "Oru is not like Lagos. The ground here has a memory, and the night belongs to them." She raised one trembling finger. "Rule number 1, Mama Obi said, never under any circumstance open the blue door at the very end of the hallway. It has been locked for 40 years. If you hear a knock, if you hear a weep, if you hear a drip, you walk away. Do you hear me?" Adanna nodded slowly, her throat too dry to find words. "Rule number 2, the old woman continued, her grip tightening until Adanna's bones ached. "Never go near the river bank after the evening crickets stop chirping. When the night goes silent, the water begins to hunt." She paused. Her clouded eyes seemed to search Adanna's face, looking for any sign of disbelief. And the final rule, Mama Obi's voice dropped to a terrifying, quiet breath. The most important of them all. If you are lying in your bed and you hear a voice calling your name after midnight, keep your mouth closed. Do not answer, do not whisper, do not even sigh. They will use the voice of your mother. They will use the voice of your lover. They will sound exactly like the people you would die for. But if you answer them, even once, you hand over your keys, and by the morning, they will be wearing your skin. Mama Obi finally released her grip. The old woman turned slowly and retreated into her bedroom, closing the door and locking it from the inside. Adanna stood alone in the suffocating quiet of the living room. The house felt less like a shelter and more like a living organism breathing around her. Her eyes, almost against her own will, drifted down the long, narrow hallway. At the very end of the corridor, bathed in deep, cold shadows, sat the blue door. It was painted a faded ocean blue. The paint was cracked and peeling like dried scales. Adanna took a slow step into the hallway. Creak! The old wood protested beneath her feet. She drew closer. Step by slow step, the temperature in the hallway was dropping. With every inch she gained, her breath began to form faint, white plumes in the air. She stopped, 3 feet from the door. On the dark floorboards, directly beneath the crack of the door, something was glistening. She bent down. It was water, not clean, clear tap water, but dark, murky river water. It was seeping out, slowly, wetting the ancient wood. And then, in the silence, she heard it again. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the other side. Adanna reached her hand out toward the brass handle. Her fingers were only inches away when she heard a low, wet, scraping sound from the other side of the wood, as if someone was leaning their face directly against the door, listening to her breathe. Adanna did not touch the handle. She pulled her hand back, as if the brass had burned her, and retreated to her bedroom, locking her own door behind her. Now, she lay beneath the pale, ghostly canopy of her mosquito net. The air inside the room was heavy, suffocating, and smelled faintly of wet grass. She kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every sound was magnified in the dark. The distant, rhythmic croaking of frogs from the river, the dry scratching of tree branches against the zinc roof, and then the crickets stopped. The sudden silence was like a physical blow. It was absolute. Adanna turned her head slowly. On the small, dusty bedside table, the red numbers of her digital clock blinked. 12:01, 12:02, 12:03. Midnight had passed. The rules were now active. She held her breath, listening to the silence, hoping, praying, that the night would pass her by, but deep down she knew. The river did not travel all this way just to go home, empty-handed. It did not start with a scream. It started with a whisper, a soft, gentle rustling right outside her bedroom window, like a woman, walking slowly through the dry grass. Adanna froze. Her entire body went rigid under the thin sheet. Then the voice came. Adanna, my baby, open the window for me. The breath left Adanna's lungs in a quiet gasp. The voice was warm. It was sweet. It held the slight, familiar lisp of her late mother, her mother who had died in a Lagos hospital 5 years ago. "It is so cold out here, Adanna," the voice cried out softly, trembling with a mother's pain. "The harmattan is biting my skin. Please, my beautiful child, just say my name, so I can find the door." Tears, hot and fast, welled up in Adanna's eyes. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to answer, to call out, "Ma!" It sounded so real. The voice began to describe a specific day from her childhood, the day they bought roasted plantain by the roadside in the rain, a memory she thought was theirs alone. "Don't you remember, Adanna?" the voice pleaded, closer now, as if the lips were pressing directly against the window glass. "Just answer me, child, please." Adanna bit her own lip, so hard she tasted copper. She jammed her hands over her mouth, crushing her breath into her palms. She wanted to believe it, but then she remembered Mama Obi's warning, "If you answer, they will be wearing your skin." Adanna did not break. She held her breath, her ribs aching from the pressure. Outside the glass, the voice waited. For one long, agonizing minute, there was only the sound of the wind, and then the illusion began to crack. The warm, sweet voice of her mother began to stretch. It became distorted, metallic, like a tape recording, playing too slow. "Adanna, why won't you answer me?" The voice decayed, dissolving into a wet, bubbling hiss that sounded like water boiling in a deep pot. Outside, the silhouette against the window changed. The soft, feminine outline twisted, growing taller and thinner. A heavy, wet thump rattled the glass. Something was scraping against the pane. Long, dark fingers made of mud and river weeds slid down the window, leaving a black, greasy trail. A low, angry growl echoed through the thin wooden walls. It was not a human voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 drowned souls speaking in unison. The creature realized she was not going to open the door. With a final, sharp, scratching sound, the shadow slipped away, sliding back down into the tall, dry grass toward the river. Adanna slid down the wall, collapsing onto the cold floor. Her body was shaking uncontrollably. She had survived the first night, but she knew this was only the beginning. The river was testing her, and tomorrow they would return with a different voice. The morning sun in Oru did not bring comfort. It only revealed the scars of the night before. When the first rays of golden light broke through the thick canopy, Adanna walked out of her room. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mama Obi was still locked in her room, refusing to answer, refusing to eat. Adanna knew she could not survive another night in the dark without understanding what was hunting her. She left the house, walking down the red dirt road until she reached the far edge of the village. There lived Pa Ezekiel, the oldest man in Oru, a keeper of the village's forgotten memories. Inside his small, warm mud hut, the smell of drying herbs and tobacco hung heavy in the air. Pa Ezekiel looked at Adanna, his cloudy ancient eyes narrowing in recognition. He did not ask her why she had come. He only shook his head. "Slowly, you have your mother's eyes, Adanna," he said, his voice like dry parchment rubbing together. "And, like your mother, you have brought the curiosity that almost destroyed this family 40 years ago." "What happened back then, Papa?" Adanna asked, leaning forward. her hands trembling. Why does my grandmother lock her door? What is behind the blue door? The old man took a slow, deep breath. That door, he whispered, holds the remains of a mirror that should have been shattered a long time ago. Pa Ezekiel leaned back into the shadows. He closed his eyes as if looking into the past. 40 years ago, he began, your grandmother, Mama Obi, was not alone. She had a twin sister, Chioma. Chioma was the most beautiful girl in Oru. Her skin was like polished bronze. Her laughter could heal a broken heart, but she was vain. She spent hours by the river, combing her hair with a golden comb she claimed she found in the mud. The old man paused, a shadow of ancient grief crossing his face. The elders warned her. They told her, the river spirit, Mame water, does not give gifts without demanding a price. But Chioma did not listen. One night, when the harmattan was fierce, Chioma stayed out, past the hour of the cricket. At midnight, she heard a voice from the water. It called her name over and over. It sounded like her own sister, Obi, begging for help. She was warned never to answer, but in her pride and her fear, she cried out, I am here. The next morning, Pa Ezekiel's voice sank to a dry whisper. Chioma returned, but she was different. She was too quiet. Her skin was cold, and her footsteps made no sound on the dirt. It was not Chioma who walked back into the village. It was the shadow, the spirit wearing her face, while the real Chioma was dragged down into the dark, watery depths of the river mirror. Pa Ezekiel opened his eyes slowly. Your grandmother, Obi, was the only one who realized the truth, he whispered. She looked at her sister and saw the hollow emptiness in her eyes. The village priests tried to cast the thing out, but the spirit was too strong. It had already rooted itself in Chioma's flesh. Obi could not bear to destroy her sister's body, so she chose a desperate path. Using an ancient clay pot filled with sacred river water, she lured the entity back into the hallway of their home. With her own hands, she pushed the creature into the room at the end of the hall and slammed the door. She wrapped thick iron chains around the handle. She snapped 3 heavy padlocks into place. She bound the shadow inside. For 40 years, Obi has lived in that house as both a guardian and a prisoner, guarding the lock, ensuring the dark water does not escape. But she is old now, Adanna. Her strength is fading, and when a guardian grows weak, the locks begin to rust. The thing behind the blue door wants to finish what it started 40 years ago. It wants your sister's blood that runs through your veins, and it will not stop until it hears you say your own name in the dark. The daylight was supposed to be safe, but as Adanna sat up in her bed the morning after her visit to Pa Ezekiel, she realized the rules were breaking, and the air in her bedroom was freezing. She swung her legs over the edge of the mattress, her bare feet dangling just above the cold wooden floor. She looked down, and her heart stopped. There, on the dusty, dry floorboards, directly beneath her feet, were wet, dark footprints. Muddy, dripping, river water footprints. They started at her locked bedroom door. They walked slowly across the room, and they stopped right beside her bed. Something had stood over her while she slept. Something that did not need to wait for her to open the door. She reached down, her fingers trembling, and touched the dark mud. It was ice cold, and it smelled of rotten river lilies and ancient decay. The boundaries between the river and this house were dissolving. The lock on the blue door was no longer enough to keep the shadow. In its place, the mud was only the beginning. By afternoon, the very air inside the house began to spoil. It was a smell that could not be washed away. The heavy, choking scent of wet clay, rotting water lilies, and stagnant river depths. It did not matter how many windows Adanna opened. The modern air spray she brought from Lagos was useless. The river was seeping into her reality. Adanna walked into the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to boil water. When she turned on the metal tap, the water that rushed out was not clear. It was thick, dark, and smelled of iron and ancient mud. She screamed, dropping the kettle as it clattered loudly against the concrete floor. From the hallway, she heard a low, bubbling chuckle. It was soft, wet, and it came from directly behind the locked blue door. The entity was celebrating. It was tasting her fear, and with every drop of sweat that fell from Adanna's forehead, the chains on the blue door rusted just a little bit more. By twilight, the house was no longer dry. The wooden walls began to sweat. Faint, dark trails of river water ran down the family photographs, staining the faces of her ancestors with black mud. Adanna stood in the corridor, the cold water already pooling around her ankles. She looked at the blue door. The 3 heavy iron padlocks were no longer black. They had turned a bright, bleeding orange. The metal was disintegrating. Flakes of rust fell into the rising water like dried blood. Creak, the wood of the blue door groaned. It bowed outward as if a massive, heavy weight was pressing against it from the other side. Mama Obi's room remained completely silent. The old guardian had spent the last of her strength. Adanna was alone. The sun had completely vanished behind the black trees of the Oru forest, and the crickets did not even start to chirp. Midnight arrived with a fury. A sudden, violent storm broke over the village of Oru. The sky went pitch black, lit only by the jagged, blue-white forks of lightning that ripped through the canopy. The wind screamed, tearing at the rusted zinc sheets on the roof, like iron fingers trying to peel the house open. Adanna sat in the living room, clutching a single, dying candle. The cellular network was dead. Her phone screen showed only no service. She was completely, entirely cut off from the world she knew. Suddenly, a sound cut through the roar of the thunder, a heavy, frantic slamming at the front door. Bang, bang, bang. The wood of the door shook. "Adanna, open the door, please. Adanna." The voice was desperate. It was sobbing. Adanna's candle slipped from her fingers, pooling hot wax onto the flooded floor. It was Chima, her boyfriend, her safe anchor from the bright streets of Lagos. "Chima," she gasped, her voice catching in her throat. "Adanna, please. I drove all night. I couldn't let you stay here alone." The voice cried out, raw with pain. "My car, it crashed on the muddy road. Some men, some things are chasing me through the bush. I am bleeding. Adanna, please, call my name. Tell me where the door is." Through the frosted glass of the front door, the lightning flashed. and she saw a silhouette. It looked exactly like Chima, the same broad shoulders, the same posture. "Chima, is that really you?" she whispered, taking a step closer, her bare feet splashing in the cold mud. "Yes, Adanna, please, they are behind me. If you love me, call my name. Open the door." The desperation in his voice was too perfect. The pain was too real. Forgetting the rules, forgetting the locked room, forgetting her grandmother's warnings. Her love became her trap. Adanna closed her eyes and let the scream rip from her chest. "Chima, I am here. Chima, come inside." The moment the name left her lips, the storm outside went dead silent. The wind stopped howling. The rain ceased to fall. The knocking vanished. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the house. From the other side of the front door, the voice of Chima changed. The desperation was gone. The sobbing turned into a low, wet, rattling chuckle. "She answered," the voice whispered, multiplying, until it sounded like a chorus of 100 whispering women. "She gave us her name." Behind her, at the end of the dark hallway, a loud, metallic snap echoed. The 3 rusted padlocks on the blue door shattered, hitting the floorboards with a heavy clang, and the blue door flew open. Adanna tried to scream, but her voice was empty air. The sound had been stolen the moment she answered. From the darkness of the blue room, a figure emerged. It was a woman, clad in wet, shimmering white lace. Her skin was the color of river silt, her eyes completely black and empty. It was the shadow of Chioma, the river spirit that had waited 40 years for this very night. A massive, rushing wave of dark, muddy water exploded from the room, sweeping Adanna off her feet. She did not drown. Instead, she felt herself being pulled backward toward the hallway mirror. The glass of the mirror was no longer solid. It was fluid, swirling like the surface of a deep pool. Adanna reached out, her fingers clawing at the wooden walls, but there was nothing to hold on to. She was dragged, skin first, through the cold glass. As she sank into the dark, watery depths of the mirror, she looked back, and she saw herself standing in the hallway, drying her hair with a golden comb and smiling, a cold, empty smile. The next morning, the sun rose over Oru, bright, warm, and indifferent. Mama Obi's bedroom door remained closed, but Adanna's room was empty. In the hallway, the mirror was solid glass once more. If you looked closely, deep beneath the silver reflection, you could see a faint, weeping face, her hands pressed against the inside of the glass. But nobody was looking, because the girl who walked out of the house carrying her vintage leather suitcase looked exactly like Adanna. She walked down the red dirt road, her boots making no sound in the dust. She did not look at the villagers, and the villagers did not look at her. She boarded the bus back to Lagos, back to Chima, in the bright, modern apartment in Lagos. Chima threw his arms around her. "Thank God you are safe, Adanna," he sobbed, burying his face in her shoulder. "I was so worried. I had the most terrible nightmares about Oru." The girl wrapped her arms around him. Her touch was cold, but Chima was too relieved to notice. "I told you, Chima," she whispered, her voice sweet. perfect and empty. It was only shadows. There was nothing to fear. She looked over his shoulder, directly into the camera. Her eyes, for a fraction of a second, flashed a deep, lifeless black, and on the clean, white rug of their Lagos apartment, her bare ankles began to drip, wet, dark river mud. They tell you it is only a story. They tell you the elders only make up rules to keep children safe. But if you ever find yourself in the quiet parts of this world and the wind whispers your name after midnight, keep your mouth shut, because some voices do not want to talk to you. They want to live your life.